Let me welcome our distinguished guest, Mr. Roger Crowley from England, who is the author of several books, page-turning history books. You can see the titles over there, but I just recollect them again. The Holy War of Constantinople, Great Constantinople, Empires of the Sea, City of Fortune, Conquerors, and the Crusaders' Last Battle for the Holy Land. His books have been praised for the narrative approach. In a review, the New York Times claimed, quote, Mr. Crowley writes with a racy briskness that lifts sea battles and sieges off the pages, unquote. This evening, Mr. Crowley will deliver a presentation entitled The City of Fortune, Venice and her Maritime Empire. Mr. Crowley, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I hope that you can see what I hope you are seeing, which is both me and my images. Is that correct? Yeah. Okay. I have to start with an apology for being late. I am not often late, but I am late because I misread the time. Thank you for turning up. I'm going to tell you the story of Venice as a maritime power. If you go to Venice now, for the first time, any of us, hold on. Yep, is the image all right? I just need to check that again.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, okay. If we go to Venice now, for the first time, we're amazed by what we see, by the number of ships and so on. But actually, we're not really understanding what Venice is about. You probably have to look at the pictures of Canaletto to get some sense of this, because now Venice is joined to the mainland by a road. But before the road connection, of course, everything that came to Venice had to come on a ship. Everything you're looking at in Canaletto's picture, the wood, the stone, the clothes, the food, arrives on a ship. And we have to think of Venice as a maritime city above all else. I want to start where, almost at the end of my story, which is the year 1500, when Venice is at the height of its power. And in that year, they produced this extraordinary map, almost as seen from a bird, looking down on their city. And it's a work of great ideological intention. They've actually slightly changed the shape of Venice so that it looks like a dolphin. And they're projecting the wealth of their city through classical imagery. The two figures that they see as crucial to Venice's identity. One is the figure of Mercury, the god of trade. I, Mercury, shine more favorably on this marketplace than all others. And the other is the figure of Neptune. I, Neptune, live here, watching over seas and this port. This expresses the relationship in Venice between money and the sea. And it presents a picture of Venice as an eternal city, as a classical city, as a place that is destined to live forever in greatness. But in point of fact, this is something that when you look at it more closely, the truth is otherwise. Venice is the only city that did not exist in Roman times, and it has arisen from a muddy lagoon through a series of extraordinary circumstances. We can think of Venice as being powerful, but actually it's physically fragile. It exists hardly above seawater. It was immensely wealthy, but at the same time short of drinking water. And it was a free republic, but its citizens were fiercely regulated. Venice came into being with no land, no agriculture, and no visible defenses. And the imagery of the map tries to give the impression that this was an effortless process, but it wasn't. we tend to think of Venice as being a fluke, a marvel, unlike anything else. But if we look at the Adriatic, we can see something else. The Adriatic has always been a critical trade route, really from the Bronze Age. Ships have made their way up the eastern shores of the Adriatic, the Dalmatian coast. And at the top of the Adriatic, there has always been, in one time or another, a point of transshipment, a place where goods from the Eastern Mediterranean transferred to land and are either ferried up the rivers of Italy or through the Alps. And Venice had cities that performed this function before it came into existence. One was a Greek city called Adria, which is now 20 kilometers up the river Po. As a result, the Po has silted up, it's spread mud out into the sea. It was followed by a Roman city called Altinum, one of the richest cities of the Roman world. The right-hand image that I'm showing you is a sort of LiDAR picture of what lies beneath the ground just behind the Marco Polo airport. Altinum was sacked in the collapse of the Roman Empire in the 5th century. So there are cities that perform the function that Venice performed before it. Venice comes into being with the collapse of the Roman Empire. People take to the lagoon for safety. And Venice, from the very beginning, because it has no land and no agricultural wealth, depends upon trade. And trade depends upon the ability to control the Adriatic Sea. The Venetians called the Adriatic our house. And the geopolitical cornerstone of Venetian thinking was controlling this sea. If they cannot escape down the Adriatic to trade with the wider Mediterranean, they can't live. So everything that Venice does is concerned with destroying competitors in this sea, ensuring that they can trade freely with the world beyond. Corfu, and at the bottom right of that map, was a critical point. They called Corfu our house, and almost a great deal of their energy is going to go into contests with Ragusa, Dubrovnik, and other ports along what is now the Croatian and Dalmatian coast. Venice starts out as a vassal, as a colony, if you like, of the Byzantine world. But by the year 1000, the Venetians are already trading with the Islamic world in Egypt, and they're already in trouble with the papacy because the Venetians, the central part of their identity is the freedom to be able to trade with anybody. And already the Venetians are deeply disliked by many people. They're disliked by the Pope. They're distrusted by their Byzantine masters in Constantinople, who call them marsh frogs. They run a semi-autonomous Catholic church, and they are going to become wealthy through the great Christian mission of the Crusades, with which they have no ideological connection. What the Venetians provide in the Crusades are all the things that the Crusaders need to establish a presence on the shores of Palestine. Crusaders need arms, they need metal, they need wood, they need to be able to transport troops. And Venice, along with its rivals, Genoa, Pisa, and Amalfi, start to make a great deal of money out of the crusading venture. The great moment for the Venetians comes in the Fourth Crusade, 1202 to 1204. In 1202, six knights from France arrive in Venice and ask for transport of 30,000 men to the Holy Land.
Sorry,
Man may come to me.
for a second. Would you please push F5 to enlarge these lines, because we cannot see them in the proper size.
Right.
Thank you.
You can't see them so well.
No, it's much better. Thank you.
Okay, right. Okay, let's go. Okay, right. Sorry. Yeah. Okay, back we go. Yeah. Okay, is that better for you?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. And the man they come to meet is the Doge of Venice, a man called Enrico Dandolo. I show you a picture which has no historical accuracy, but it's a picture of Dandolo. I can show you a picture of Dandolo. He's on this coin. He's the man on the left looking very sad, and the man on the right is St. Mark. Dandolo is 90 years old. He's blind, but he is a man of deep experience. And he does a deal with the Crusaders that the Venetians will provide transport to the Holy Land. They will transport 33,000 men for a sum of 94,000 marks. This is a huge sum. This is equal to the annual income of France. And this is the largest commercial contract in the Middle Ages. It requires the services of 30,000 seamen, a year's preparation, a year's active service, and half the male population of Venice to be involved in transporting the men on ships. It's hugely risky for the Venetians because it means that they cannot trade with anybody else while they're fulfilling this contract. The problem is when the Crusaders turn up in Venice, there's only 11,000 of them. They can't pay. And out of this come a series of circumstances that lead to a quite extraordinary conclusion. I'm not going to go into the detail of this, but the Crusaders can't pay the debt. The Venetians get involved in a plan to put to change the emperor in Constantinople. Events get out of hand, and what is meant to be a crusade to capture Jerusalem ends up with storming the Christian city of Constantinople. The Venetians celebrated this picture 300 years afterwards in a painting in Tintoretto of the Venetians using their maritime know-how to storm the battlements and take the city. The Venetians are going to do very well out of this, because out of this they acquire the best bits of the Byzantine Empire, the bits they really need, which is a maritime empire, what they call the Stato da Mar, the empire of the sea. And for the Venetians, it means these small yellow islands that I've picked out, scattered across the eastern Mediterranean. Two forts on the south coast of Greece, Modon and Coron, which they called the Eyes of the Republic. An island on the east coast of Greece, which the Venetians called Negroponte, the Black Bridge, the Greeks called Evia. Trading rights, docks, warehouses, and free trading in Constantinople. Some islands in the Aegean, in the Cyclades, and most important of all, the island of Crete. Crete is going to be very important to the Venetians. What the Venetians get out of this empire is not territory, not vastly wealthy agricultural land. They get bases and harbors which will serve their commercial interests, that will allow them to make journeys across the Mediterranean, to trade with the Islamic world. What follows in the 13th century is a very large population boom in Europe, and there are enormous commercial opportunities to be made. The Venetians develop from these opportunities trading routes across the whole of the Mediterranean and as far east as the Black Sea and as far west as London. And this provides them with the opportunity to move goods around the Mediterranean and beyond the Mediterranean. what comes out of this is the development of Venice. When I showed you this map of Venice at the beginning, it had the idea that this is a classical city, but it isn't. And what Venice creates from the places it goes to, the plunder that it gathers, is what I would call a city of borrowings. If we look at the Church of St. Mark, it looks to me very oriental, halfway to a mosque. And everything that we see in Venice is an invented city, and it's invented out of the places that it goes to, the plunder that it gathers, and the mythology that it creates out of this. If we look at St. Mark's, it is studied with looting from Constantinople. These two figures on the left, Roman emperors from Constantinople, icon on the right of St. Michael from the city. The four horses of St. Mark's come from the hippodrome of Constantinople, but become the symbol of the city. So they have almost stolen the identity of what was once their mother city. This monument, just outside St. Mark's, comes from the city of Tyre on the coast of Palestine. And on the right, standing on a column, this curious figure of Saint Theodore. The head comes from a Roman statue. The body comes from a Greek statue. The crocodile was carved in Venice in the 14th century. And together they put this extraordinary thing together. And I think this picture, as much as anything, demonstrates the way that the Venetians really were plunderers who made an identity out of the things that they collected from other places. Venice becomes a city of ceremony, of great public events. And this is something that they learned from the Byzantines. I think this is the celebration of the, I can't remember which festival now, the Holy Cross. At the same time, if you look at their architecture, it draws very heavily on the Islamic world, because a great deal of the trading that Venice does is with Egypt, Damascus, and the cities of the East. And they were influenced in the window shapes and in the architectural detailing of very much of Venice by architecture that they saw. When I think of Venice, I'm reminded of Constantinople. I'm reminded of Cairo and Alexandria, and I'm reminded of Bruges, the Gothic of Europe. Somehow Venice reminds you of all these places, but it is itself, and it comes from the trade that they gathered from across the sea. They also stole their saints, what in medieval Latin was called sacra furta, the theft of sacred things. The patron saint of Venice is St. Mark. St. Mark was Bishop of Alexandria. Venetian merchants stole the body from Alexandria and brought it back to Venice. They stole this saint here, which is Saint Isidore from the island of Chios. And so they created their own religious identity out of this. And the theft of saints is actually also very good for tourism, because people came to, excuse me, came to Venice as a place of religious importance. But all this importance was not intrinsic to the city. These saints never came from Venice, but they were bodies stolen from other places. So you can see the way that they were building an identity out of collecting things from other places. In the process, from everybody else, they gather a reputation for craftiness, ruthlessness, and lack of Christian solidarity. During the process of their trading ventures, they gather competitors. And this particularly is the other Italian maritime states, Pisa, Genoa, and Amalfi. And for about 130, 150 years, they fight battles with their competitors for the trade of the Mediterranean. It's a kind of great game and one of the great contests of Mediterranean history, particularly between Venice, the most serene, and Genoa, the proud. They're very different cities. The Venetians are very controlled, very well organized, with very great group solidarity. The Genoese are very individualistic, more inventive than the Venetians. And these battles are going to be fought across the sea for over a century, everywhere where Genoese and Venetian merchants meet, anywhere from Venice to anywhere from the Black Sea to London. Wherever Venetian and Genoese merchants meet, they fight. There are 4 Genoese wars for the Venetians. These are wars of piracy, of pitched sea battles, and they're fought around the strategic choke points of Mediterranean trade, particularly Cyprus and particularly Constantinople. Much of the contest involves the Black Sea, and one of the consequences of the Black Sea is going to be a disaster for the rest of Europe, because the Venetians and the Genoese, in contact with the tribal peoples of Central Asia, export from the Black Sea the Black Death. The first city to be hit by the Black Death is going to be Constantinople. The second city to be hit by the Black Death is going to be Venice itself. And Venice is going to lose 1/3 of its population in the 1350s to the plague. A repeating pattern. We know from the way that airports are spreading COVID around now, seaports did exactly the same thing. And Venice spread, both within Venice itself and through its trade routes, the Black Death, which is going to wipe out 1/3 of the population of Europe. This is one of the legacies of Venetian and Genoese trade. Strangely, despite the decimation of their populations, the Genoese and the Venetians go on fighting. And the closest that Venice comes to annihilation is going to be the years 1379 and 1380, what is called the War of Chaogia. The War of Chaogia involves a union of the Genoese and the kings of Hungary in trying to expel Venice from the Adriatic. And it gets to the point where the Genoese in Chioggia, which is at the bottom of the lagoon, which I'm showing you a picture of now, Venice in the middle there, they managed to close all the 3 entrances which are marked with stars to the lagoon, and they are throttling Venice. This is a near-death experience for the Venetians. It's as close as they ever get to annihilation. And it's a moment that draws on all the patriotic ability and feeling of the Venetian people. And at this moment, one man, a man called Vittorio Pisani, there's a little statue of him in one of the churches, persuades the Venetians to sail out from Venice, and they counter-blockade the Genoese in Chioggia, down where the yellow star is, and they win. Venice has, during this period, has been cut off from all trade. It's starting to starve, and it is as close as Venice will ever come to being annihilated. But it wins, and in the process, it wins the battle against the Genoese for trade. It has been taken to the brink of defeat. After the brink of defeat, Venice bounces back, And the Stato de Mar in the 15th century once again becomes incredibly rich. They take Zadar, as it now is. They take Corfu, they acquire Cyprus. And during this period, it becomes a fully fledged empire, an empire in which their subjects are going to be Slavs, they're going to be Greeks, and they're going to be Albanians. It becomes an early model for European colonization. Venetians are economically very repressive. They tax their colonies very rigorously. They're not interested in religious conversion. They're not interested in their culture. They're not terribly interested in their subjects. They just want to acquire material goods. And it's what I would call a very centrist empire. Everything is ruled from Venice. We can see the remains of this empire scattered across the eastern Mediterranean now. In Corfu, these are the Galley. This is the Galley port in Venice where they kept their ships. They had the same kind of arrangement in Hvar on the coast, on the Dalmatian coast, at Kotor in Montenegro in the Gulf of Kotor. They had fortresses at Butrint on the Albanian coast, and in Durrës, and above all in Heraklion and Crete. You can cross the eastern Mediterranean and see the remnants of Venetian imperial might. This is the Rocca de Mar, the sea fort, and this is the port of Venice where they kept their war galleys. So Venice has left these marks all over the eastern Mediterranean. It fell heavily on different parts of the Mediterranean in different ways. It provided a model of empire that is very, what I call very centrist. And it said, if a man be in any territory of theirs, although at the ends of the earth, it seems as if it were in Venice itself. They created mini Venices in each of these places. The eastern Mediterranean, Adriatic particularly, becomes a Venetian cultural lake. Many of the towns on the Dalmatian coast look very Italian. This is Porec, Parenzo, as the Venetians called it. Their churches are modeled on Venetian churches. At Hvar, the Cathedral of Hvar is almost a replica of San Michele in Venice. In many ways, these places were Italian speaking. An 18th century visitor to Zadar described it as civilized as any city in Italy. And there was quite a high level of loyalty along the Dalmatian coast to Venice. The Dalmatian coast provided Venice with a source of seamen and of wood for shipbuilding. This is the Venetian Lodger, the administrative center of Crete on Heraklion. Everywhere you can go in this landscape, you will see the Venetian lion. It is both the badge of St. Mark and it is a sign of domination. This is in Zadar. Lions come in all shapes and sizes, some of them fierce, all of them with the open book showing with the words, "Peace be to you, St. Mark, the evangelist." But if this is the logo of Venice, it is a sign of their empire, but it also contains threats. The lion of this place, Trogir, on the Dalmatian coast, does not say peace unto you, St. Mark. It contains a threat to its subjects. It says, the unjust will be punished, and the impious, the wicked, will always perish. Because as well as providing a message of peace, it provided a threat that if you rebel against Venice, it will be trouble. And the Venetians, for all the beauty of their city, the romance of the place, their music, their architecture, the extraordinary magic of Venice. Underneath this are a group of very hard-headed merchants and imperialists. There is a steel fist inside the velvet glove of Venice. I always think that this picture, this is an island in the Gulf of Kotor in Montenegro, of these two characters carrying a heavy weight, kind of is a kind of symbolic sense of the feeling that the subjects of Venice experienced under colonial rule. They were taxed heavily. Montenegrins, I think particularly, if you look at the bare hillside behind Kotor in the Gulf of Kotor, their hillside had stripped of trees to build Venetian ships over the centuries. Crete ran a particularly repressive colonial system. The Greek Orthodox people of Crete did not like their Venetian masters. They remembered the sacking of Constantinople. They rose again and again against their masters. And if you look at the Venetian archives of Crete, you get a sense of how heavily the weight of Venice falls on the city. Here are a couple of examples. This man, Gestus of Bohemia, for theft from the treasury of Crete, amputation of the right hand, public confession, and hanging outside the treasury. For Emmanuel Thologite, loss of the right hand and both eyes for letting a Cretan rebel escape. And for Thomas Bianco, removal of tongue for insulting remarks against Venice. So when you look into the state archives of Venice, you can see the way that it operates. It operates an impartial justice system, actually, because it treated its own colonial administrators with the same toughness that it treated its subject people. And it sent out these men, the proveditore, these are like auditors, overseers of the Venetian Empire. And they would go out without warning to any of the Venetian colonies, look over the books, check to see if there were cases of corruption. And even the most senior Venetian official on Crete, the Duke of Crete, could be grabbed, taken back to a Venetian, in a Venetian galley to Venice, tried and executed. Venice ran an incredibly detailed bureaucratic system. In the Doge's palace, Venetian clerks and bureaucrats collected a vast amount of information about their subjects. The state archives of Venice run to 60 miles of shelving. They monitored and measured everything down to the details. If they ran an oppressive state outside of Venice, they also ran a secret state within Venice that came down very heavily on its citizens. People would disappear and be found drowned in the canal if they were speaking against the Venetian state. They also had the most effective spying system in Europe to find out what was going on outside their country. So this is a state really which is really quite ruthless in its way. Underneath this, of course, Venice is a world of ships, and the iconography of ships is present throughout Venice in mosaics, sailing ships carved on the sides of buildings, or galleys, oared galleys, in the paintings of painters such as Carpaccio. In the map that I showed you, we can see here round ships, sailing ships, and galleys, and small ships and big ships. These are central to the whole way that the Venetians saw themselves. A galley outside the old galley, anchored by the Doge's palace. And it's all about control of the sea. The ship that you can see coming in here, fast, low, ship is a Venetian war galley in this painting by Carpaccio. Venice prided itself on its navy, and this is a navy of oared galleys, very fast, very low in the water. By the end of the 15th century, very heavily gunned. Venice believed that it could outfight any competitor in the Mediterranean. And they enforced this with, again, they fell on their commanders with the same heavy weight of commands that they fell on everybody else. If you were appointed to captain of the sea for a campaign, you did not, and you went into battle, you had to win. There was no option. You could not refuse to fight. So the whole spirit of maritime warfare runs behind the Venetian state. They knew if they could not control the sea, they could not trade. They fought to win. A captain of the sea who refused the battle could be executed. So this is kind of, because underneath the logic of this is, if they lose control of the sea, it's all over for Venice. Venice has no land, it has no ability to do anything but trade. Alongside war galleys, they have what are called merchant galleys. These were a mixture of a sailing and an oared ship, and these were the ships that carried the high-priced goods of the East, lightweight spices, pearls, silk, that kind of thing. Alongside that, they had what you might call what we call round ships, sailing ships, which carried the essentials of to keep Venice alive: wheat, oil, cotton, the things which the bulk commodities. Policing the sea was critical, and of all the things that the Venetians detested, it was piracy. And this is a long battle the Venetians fought with Slav pirates called the Uzkoks, and they were ruthless when it came to piracy. They were said known to roast pirates alive on their own oars. For Venice, piracy was the ultimate crime. The hub of Venetian maritime activity is the arsenal, which was the shipyard of Venice in this map here. A huge area of shipbuilding, of manufacture of all the components needed for shipbuilding, for making ropes, for making anchors, all brought together in one place. And they developed a system here of incredible efficiency, which might be, there's the main gate of Venice, with still there today. The lion of the arsenal does not have an open book. He has a closed book. It is closed because it is ready for war. Within the arsenal, they developed what might be almost a prototype of assembly line production, where they divided out all the different parts of the operation, make the hulls, store the hulls, make the oars, store the oars, make the anchors, store the anchors, and then when you need to put a ship together, you can do it very, very quickly. And they had very high levels of specialism in this work. There are the hulls, dry stored, ready to be, if they have to fight a naval campaign, they could put a galley together very quickly. When the King of France came to visit in the 1570s, they were said to have constructed a complete galley during the course of a state banquet, just to show off what they could do. They micromanage everything. The manufacture of cordage, the manufacture of rope is the security of our galleys. They realized if the ropes were not good enough, then ships would drag their anchors and they would be wrecked. So they color-coded their anchors for the purposes that they had to be used. and they tested them very carefully. These are people who are micromanaging all the details of a system, because they're so goal focused on what do we have to do to trade. And this was the wonder of Europe in its way. They managed trees in forests down to the last tree. You need oak trees for one part of the ship, beech trees for another, pine for another. Here is the process at work, and you can see various people in this picture. The two men that I've circled are the master architects, but you can see the men who are making masts in the bottom there. You can see the people on the left here who are making the hull, and you can see people who plank it out. So they had different specialist crafts within this. The arsenal workers, the arsenalotti, were the aristocrats of the Venetian workforce, and they were extremely well paid. And the superstar of the system was the master shipwright. They understood that the sea takes no prisoners. A badly seamed ship or a rotten rope could lead to disaster. When we think of the Venetians as romantic people, we should also think of them as very hard-headed, factual people. Venice is a republic of wood, iron, rope, sails, rudders, masts, oars, almost as if everything depended on these materials. This is a predecessor of Henry Ford and the automobile production methods of the 20th century. We tend to think of the Venetian system as fantastically logical, but I have to say that in one capacity, that it took them 200 years to work out that if you're going to manufacture gunpowder, it's best not to manufacture it next to a place where you've got blacksmiths who are hammering iron and creating sparks, because it took several disastrous explosions before they decided that it was best to move the manufacture of gunpowder into another island on the lagoon. Behind this, of course, Venice is a city of merchants. Everybody in Venice potentially could trade. And if we look at the three power centers of Venice, the trading center of the Rialto, the seat of government, the Doge's palace, and shipping, these are all run by the same group of people, merchant people. And they thought about trading again very logically. They realized that to have a sound currency was very important. This is the Venetian ducat. This is the dollar of its day that was valued all over the world for the soundness of its currency, all the way to India. This was recognized as the currency to use. Anybody who forged the currency was executed. There's no two ways about it. This is the what I call the Souk of Europe. This is the place that everybody came to trade, and they thought through all the details. Goods arrived here at the La Dogana, the customs house, where they were taxed, not too heavily, but 5%. They were then sent up the Grand Canal to the Rialto. There's the customs house there. This is the Rialto here, the trading center of Venice, where merchants came from all over Europe to buy things. And they understood the importance of the trade fairs. The goods arrived in time, that if people wanted something, it should be available here. So they had rational taxation. They understood the law of supply and demand, consumer choice, and a close relationship between merchants and seamen. The key to their efficiency was their trading route, which allowed them to trade so widely and bring goods into Europe, into Venice at set times of the year. Above all, they concentrated on the Islamic world, because the spice markets of Alexandria, Syria, Damascus were very important. They had a long and very intense relationship with Islam, and they spent a huge amount of energy trading and diplomatic activity This is the man in red with the surrounded by black figures in black. These are Venetians trade delegation. The man in red is the diplomatic representative talking to the Islamic governor of Damascus. And this picture, in a way, which is a Venetian picture, sums up the whole exotic feeling that the Venetians had about the Orient. And they had extraordinary diplomatic skills. And the Orient really works its way into Venetian soul, into their architecture, into their language, and into the language of Europe. Words that we have in the European languages, or certainly in English: risk, check, magazine, douane in French, are Arabic words imported from Venice into Venetian art, and into a taste for Oriental objects, carpets and decoration and so on. And from the East, they brought spices, cotton, glass, precious stones, exotic animals, pearls, very high value goods. And these were the goods that made Venice really the wealthiest place in Europe. In their art, they project this story of wealth raining down onto Venice. In their ceremonies, they celebrate their maritime story. Every year, this is the Doge about to set out into the Adriatic for what was called the marriage of the sea, where they would drop a ring into the sea and say, "We marry the sea." And this maritime identity in their art is central to what they are. In the Doge's palace, it's full of these pictures of Neptune pouring wealth into Venice, characterized by the woman on the right, into a celebration of their great sea battles, the Battle of Lepanto, and the picture that I showed you of the taking of Constantinople in 1204. The problem comes in the 15th century with the coming of the Ottomans. By 1453, the Byzantine Empire has almost had it, and we know that in 1453 it's going to fall to Mehmet the Conqueror. And Mehmet is going to emerge as the unconquerable enemy of the Venetian state. Although the Venetians have got a large number of bases around the Mediterranean, they are immediately in trouble. Venetians will try, have at least 7 attempts to poison Mehmet, but they fail. And one by one, particularly their bases which are attached to land, are taken by Mehmet. He takes Negroponte, the Black Bridge Island off the east coast of Greece in 1472. And slowly they are losing ground, one after another. Anywhere where the Ottoman army can attack a base from land is under pressure. And the moment of wake-up truth for Venetians is actually 1499, almost exactly the date that they were celebrating the eternal myth of Venice in the map that I showed you at the beginning. And 1499 is August 1499 is a very bad month for Venice. The Venetians have a base at Lepanto at the mouth of the Gulf of Corinth. And the Ottomans realize that they can attack it from both land and sea. They develop their own fleet, and they set out to send a fleet round the Peloponnese to attack it from the sea. And at the place that I've just put a little flash over, Zonchio, there is a meeting of the Venetian and Ottoman fleet. At the same time, there are bank crashes within Venice, and even worse, they think it's Christopher Columbus has made his way around Africa to India to buy spices direct. It's actually Vasco da Gama, but they're severely frightened by this, because if Europeans can load up huge quantities of spices in many ships and bypass buying them through the Islamic world, that their business model is in trouble. But at Zonchio in August 1499, there is a sea battle between the Venetian fleet and the Ottoman fleet. The Ottomans have one very large sailing ship, and at the height of the battle, it is attacked by two very large Venetian ships. And this remarkable picture of which Christopher Columbus actually had a print. The two Venetian ships are in the front, and the large Ottoman ship is behind. And it is said that at the height of the battle, the three ships became entangled, and the Ottomans set fire to their gunpowder, and the three ships went up in a fireball. And the rest of the Venetian fleet are, for the first time, refused to engage the enemy. And the Ottomans managed to sail on round to the Lepanto and capture it. And this is a disaster. It's the first time that the Venetians have actually lost the sea battle by an act of cowardice. The commanders, the surviving commanders, are put on trial, and the death penalty is demanded, although they actually don't. It actually doesn't happen. But this is a turning point, really. This is the point at which Venice starts to lose its control of the sea. And from this point on, Venice is under pressure from which it will never recover as a maritime power. They will fight a long rearguard action. Crete will not fall to the Ottomans till 1666, I think, but through all this period, they are losing ground, and they are turning their back on the sea at this point. There's a very emblematic painting by Carpaccio about this period. The Lion of Venice has got its feet in the water, but it's got its front feet on land. And at this point, the big debate in Venice is, are we a sea power, or are we going to be a land power? And increasingly, Venice will become a land power rather than a sea power. It will become not a maritime capital, but a cultural place, a place where people come for its for the beauty of the place. And at the start of the process, that it's going to turn it into a tourist center, you could say, the long retreat from the sea. And slowly the wealth is going to drain out of the lagoon. It will be a long decline, and it's not until 1799, when Napoleon marches into Venice, that the Venetian Republic will be over. And the Venetian Republic survives for, what, 1400 years. That's longer than the Roman Empire, longer than the Ottoman Empire. And it's an extraordinary achievement, if you like. And on the Dalmatian coast, there was great sadness in many of the places when Venice surrenders to Napoleon. This is a place called Perast, and here are the local people of Perast kissing the Venetian flag for the last time and then burying it under the altar. And the governor of Perast makes a statement to say, Perast has sustained until the very end the honor of the Venetian flag. We lower it bathed in our bitterest and universal tears. There was great sadness, I think, for many people, certainly not for the Greeks, but by that time they'd wriggled free, but for this city and what it had achieved. And I think it can be said, as Pietro Cassola said back in 1494, I do not think there is any city to which Venice, the city founded on the sea, can be compared. Thank you very much. Thank you.